Hello, I'm Josephine Burton and welcome back to the Dash Arts podcast, seeing the world through an artistic lens. 2022 marks the culmination of Dash's 5-year investigation into European identity and what Europe means. Alongside this podcast, we've produced some real-life shows and events with artists from across Europe. One of these was the Dash Arts Forum, an installation cum performance at Latitude Festival. Within it, I wanted to explore public space and the nature of community at a time where, even before COVID, people were withdrawing from public space, off the high street and into their phones. As part of the forum, we collectively performed great speeches from across time and across Europe. We sang rabble-rousing songs and we brandished toy swords from our soapboxes. We sang the Internationale and No Pasarán and danced like whirling dervishes to Bella Ciao. To us at Dash, these songs of protest were at the heart of our community of artists and activists, and it has inspired me to devote our series to protest music, entering the genre through the 3 songs that particularly mean something to Dash.
Le monde va changer de base, nous ne sommes rien, soyons-nous. C'est la lutte finale, pour nous et demain. L'internationale sera le genre humain. C'est la lutte finale, pour nous.
Our first episode takes on the Internationale. The lyrics to the Internationale were written in France in 1873 and have been adapted and sung across the world for the last 150 years. In English, it was most recently given a makeover by the folk musician and activist Billy Bragg, whose version we'd sung at our forum. I asked Billy how he first came across the song.
During the miners' strike, particularly in 1984 and 1985 in the UK, that was kind of my political education, really, because I didn't go to university. So coming into contact with more radical artists, more radical performers, and the performance of more radical songs, it was just the Internationale. It was those other songs as well, anti-fascist songs, Bella Ciao, you mentioned, No Pasarán, a whole new culture. So I have that relationship with it, coming to it and kind of in the context of the miners' strike.
With what lyrics? What lyrics were they that you were singing at the time?
The lyrics that I heard and kind of took to be the lyrics were what I later found out were specifically the English lyrics, the English language translation. Arise, ye starvelings, from your slumbers, arrive, ye criminals, prisoners of want, for freedom in result now thunders, and here ends the age of cant. Always difficult with that because want doesn't rhyme with cant. I'm a bit of a pedant when it comes to those things. So I tended to hum along and just sing the chorus if it was sung together. And then in 1989 at the Vancouver Folk Festival, I was having my lunch in the artist tent, and Pete Seeger come and sat down opposite me, who I'd known from sort of earlier Woody Guthrie workshops and also done some shows with him in East Germany. He come and sat down. He said, Billy, I'm going to sing the Internationale on Sunday night at the close of the festival in solidarity with the students in Tiananmen Square, because it was just around that time. It must have been a week or 2 after. And of course, they had been singing the Internationale. So he said, I'm going to sing that in solidarity with the students. And Bruce Cockburn is going to come on and sing the Canadian version, and someone else is going to come on and sing the Spanish version. And I'd love you to come on and sing the English version. And I was like, oh, Pete, come on, give me a break. Those lyrics are so archaic. They don't even mean anything anymore, do they, really? So he said, well, why don't you write some new ones? And there's some people in folk music you can't tell to get lost. And Pete Seeger's one of them. When old man Pete puts it on you, it's like a professor putting it on you. And before I could really complain anything about it, he picked up a flyer off the table with the blank back of it. And on the back of it, he got a pencil and he sang quietly to himself underneath his breath the first verse in French and the chorus in French, So he's like, c'est la lutte finale. So he then wrote down, what it was in English and kind of gave it to me, a literal translation of the original lyrics, first verse and chorus, and said to me, you've got 24 hours, see what you can do. So 24 hours later, there I was on stage singing a verse and a chorus of the Internationale, a new lyrical verse and chorus.
Before Billy tells us more about his Internationale, I want to put the history of protest songs in context. We reached out to John Street, Professor of Politics at the University of East Anglia and the Principal Investigator for Our Subversive Voice, a new project researching the use of song to register protest from the 1600s to the present day. Who better to introduce the genre?
There's a long English tradition of the protest song, which goes way back before 1945 and which has, stands comparison with what you get from the States and many other countries. And so that's where the project came from, an attempt to show that actually there are at least 400 years of English protest singing that people should know about because it's a very important form of political expression. That was the thought anyway.
Are you able to give us a potted history of those 400 years? On one leg?
No, no. I mean, in one sense, you could say, if you go back, so the first song we have what we did was we selected 250 songs that sort of cover the period. There's another 500 songs we've listed, and there are, of course, many more that we could have listed. But with these 250, we thought, well, they kind of tell the story of that protest song over time. And what's noticeable is the first song we have from 1603 is a song complaining at the fact that King James is selling knighthoods to the rich. And there's a kind of, a verse which is saying, if you've got money, you can get on in this world. And you're thinking, well, we're still complaining about that. And that's still what protest songs are about in our current decade, where the giving of, selling of knighthoods or peerages and so forth is still going on. And so there's this continuity, and the continuity of disdain for the ruling class or the political class. That's a constant over the history of the protest song. But then on the other hand, the songs that complain about the monarchy, which were very common in the earlier centuries of our history, are much less common now. And the kind of complaints that people make in protest songs today are more general, perhaps, in some way than in previous eras. So you can see there are changes in the form of the song, and you can see changes in the topic, and you can see changes in the forms of expression that people use. But they're still singing about the way their world is organised, and that seems to me an important fact of political communication.
Presumably there are quite a lot of reasons for those changes. How much of it is to do with distribution? Because how were those songs distributed in the 17th century? How did people hear about them? How did people hear them?
One of the reasons we start in 1600 for our history is actually that's the point at which a commercial market in songs comes into existence. I mean, London is perhaps the first place where music is formally commercialised in the form of published song sheets. So that, in a way, it marks for us anyway, the period that we're covering, the one where you trade songs and you publish songs and you make songs available for a larger audience. Of course, there is a much longer history of the orally distributed songs, but in terms of providing formal mechanisms to bring songs into existence, then that's so important. And what you're saying is very important, that understanding how protest songs or political song in general circulate. It has to be not just that there are people out there with a political conscience who want to say stuff. They have to be given the means to do that. There has to be audiences created in order for them to be heard. And then there are regulations and censorship and all sorts of other things going on to make these songs available or to suppress them. So the history of the protest song or the history of the political song is a history of all sorts of interactions between various facilitators and those who seek to stop the circulation of those songs.
It's so interesting. And how much of the distribution happened through lyrics being distributed to well-known popular songs and distributed by paper, and how much of it were troubadours going around singing their own songs and doing it live, that live kind of more oral handing over of material?
I think a great deal of this it takes, as you say, the oral form. And what's very noticeable, certainly for much of the early history of the protest song, is the ways in which it borrows tunes. The songs that we hear, often, by the way, anonymously written. We don't know who the authors of many of the early songs are. They borrow tunes, and so you see several songs reappearing, each using the same tune. I mean, that still happens to an extent. You still can get that even today, but that was very much the way in which songs circulated in the early days. So that people who knew song tunes or hymn tunes or whatever was being used immediately could pick up what the song sounded like. But also, of course, a lot of the lyrics were without musical accompaniment, and so people made up their own tunes to fit the words, as it were, in that period as well. One of the things, funnily enough, we talk about a lot in this project is the lyrics and how you make sense of them. I mean, because there is a tendency in a lot of discussion of music, and particularly in its relation to politics, to make everything about the lyrics. That it's the words that tell the story. And as anybody who actually listens to music knows, that sometimes you don't hear the lyrics for a long time. You just like a song and you sort of get caught up in it. You couldn't repeat the lyrics. And often you may even mishear those lyrics. So I think there's a danger of making too much of the lyrics. I mean, it varies, of course, with different types of song. And obviously in contemporary rap, for example, the lyrics are much more important than it might be in a traditional love song or something. But even when you're working with lyrics, it's what they sound like in conjunction with a melody and a rhythm that really gives them meaning. They don't have, they are not read as poetry. They don't exist on the page. They exist in the communication of music. And I think that's what's important, so that, songs that might not sound terribly political can perhaps acquire that simply by the mood they create or the sentiments they seem to be evoking.
Or the context in which they're heard.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, famously, the children in Soweto protesting at the fact they were being forced to learn Afrikaans, singing Pink Floyd's "I Don't Want No Education" is a classic example of a song that existed in a quite different context, being used here to protest. And then other extraordinary examples, there's songs from Les Miserables being sung in Gezia Park in Turkey in protest at what the Turkish government's doing. These are songs that weren't written for these protests and weren't intended for that particular context, but acquire dramatic political context. And there's, when Mrs. Thatcher dies, there's a song from The Wizard of Oz, which was nothing to do with Mrs. Thatcher or the Conservative government or anything else, becomes the protest at what she had done to Britain as it was seen by the protesters.
Wow, what was that song?
Yeah, I knew you'd ask me that.
It was inevitable, wasn't it?
The Witch is Dead.
Oh, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. Of course, it must be.
Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, yeah.
So what are the ingredients, would you say, then, of a song that can transcend its place and transcend its time to have power, to have lasting power? I
mean, I think you would want to make distinctions between songs that are sung collectively or have that, and clearly there's a certain kinds of, basic choral familiarity or whatever that is picked on. So a song like "We Shall Overcome" is one that, it's very easy for people to know it and to sing it. And then you find it being sung in all the extraordinary places. Like, for example, my team, Norwich, were being beaten by Aston Villa, and the Aston Villa supporters were singing "We Shall Overcome." They were winning. I don't know why they were singing that. It didn't need it. But, I mean, the idea here is a song that is easy to accompany and a protest or a march. And I think that's, that sort of functional role is very important. But then there are other songs that, aren't to be sung in that sort of collective form, but still have a tremendous resonance over time. And, something like Peggy Seeger's "I'm Gonna Be an Engineer," it's as a kind of song about, a feminist protest, you might say. It's still as resonant today as it was when it was composed in the early 1970s or whatever.
And that is the lyrical context.
Yeah, I think there it is. And what was interesting, that song was written as part of a theatre performance, a kind of satirical theatre performance. And in a way, there was an audience there to listen to the lyrics and to be, as it were, swept up in its content. And that makes a difference gives greater prominence to the lyrics in a way that perhaps other kinds of songs might not require that or depend upon that.
strengthened by John's summary of the ideal protest song, one with a catchy, uplifting marching tune and lyrics which continue to have resonance today, we tracked down Robert Service, a British historian and academic who's written extensively on the Soviet Union, to give us a little more background on the Internationale itself. I'm really keen to have some kind of historical background and context for its origins, and then its ongoing use and application, and what it meant to people over the 20th century. Can you give me a little potted history, please?
Yeah, well, it was an amazingly popular song among socialists at the turn of the century. The words were written by someone who'd taken part in the struggle of the Paris Commune of the 1870s, and it got picked up in that way. And originally, it was sung to the Marseillaise, which is a French revolutionary marching song, and identified with the French state, in fact. So the decision was taken then that a different melody should be used. And they used another French revolutionary song for soldiers called the Chant du Départ, the song of the leaving, the song of the departure. And that's the tune that we know it by now. So it was sort of assembled from two different angles, and it was immediately hugely successful. So it got sent overseas to the other socialist parties, and it got identified with the Second Socialist International, hence the name of the song itself. I tell you what used to happen. At the beginning of a congress, people would stand and sing it. People would feel that song stood for getting rid of all of the privations and economic and material difficulties that they faced in their country, but linking themselves to socialists overseas. So it was a great linking song. And my God, it's a fantastic melody. So people enjoyed singing it. I mean, if it hadn't been such a great tune, the words changed over the years. They weren't the same words as the original, because they're a bit clunky. And I can see why Billy...
Just in the original French, they're quite clunky.
Yeah, and they get outdated because we don't use language about Caesar and the like to refer to our rulers anymore. So it was an adaptable set of lyrics.
Interestingly, we had a great chat with John Street, who has just created this amazing website called Subversive Voice, where he's collecting English protest songs, and he talked about how often lyrics are put to known songs, because there's something very easy. You can adopt new lyrics for a song that you're comfortable with already. So presumably that's the evolution, that explains the evolution and the joining together of these two songs.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, that's what happened to folk songs over the centuries, after all. No, folk songs don't have a permanent lyric. So why should a socialist political song? I approve of the adaptation. I absolutely approve.
To come back to your point about how that some of these lyrics were quite updated, I've just found that lyric, the original one in the English translation: neither God nor Caesar nor Tribune. There are no supreme saviours, neither God nor Caesar nor Tribune.
Yeah, do you imagine singing that, eh?
I'm sure it sounds slightly better in French, but was it because it was later adopted as the first anthem of the Soviet Union?
Yeah, it was. It was. Socialists in Russia, they couldn't sing it in public before 1917 because it was so identified with opposition to the Tsars. So when the Tsar was overthrown in 1917, all the socialist parties, not just the communists, they all sang it on every possible occasion. They first sang it to commemorate the dead in the February Revolution of 1917. And they went on singing it and playing it. The military bands learnt the tune, and they played it outside the palace that Nicholas II, the deposed Tsar, was confined in after the February Revolution. And they really thoroughly irritated him because his daughters started whistling it because it's such a catchy tune, they started whistling it round the house. He was really thoroughly teased by the military bands. All the socialist groups were attracted by the tune, and after the communists came to power, they altered the words. They updated them. They made them a lot less clunky.
In the Russian.
The Russian version is more straightforward and less floridly poetic. And that anthem, in the Soviet Union, it was known as a hymn. It was a sort of almost a sacred song. That lasted until 1944.
I've got visions of it with the Red Army. I mean, I think I've heard versions of the Red Army recordings of that song. It's definitely still, to me, when I hear the Internationally, I immediately I'm immediately transported to the Soviet Union.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the communist parties all around the world and Labour parties enjoyed singing it. But the thing was, you have to bear in mind always, the name of the song, the name of the hymn is the Internationale. And when the Soviet Union became more oriented towards itself and away from the world socialist movement, then it was no longer fully appropriate. So Stalin had to commission a new state hymn, as it was called, and he ditched the Internationale.
That's a totally fascinating insight. When was it officially ditched?
1944. He also ditched the Communist International itself. So it wasn't just the hymn that was, or the song that was got rid of. It was also the whole of the Comintern, the Communist International, that united all the communist parties of the world.
But just to ask you a little bit about the language and evolution of the language, it's all about hope. It's like, we will fight, we will get there, we will achieve our aims, let's keep going, the last struggle. But once you've realized your aims in the Soviet Union, and once the kind of communism, in those early 20s and 30s, and this was the anthem, did they change that kind of future idealism? Did it become more about kind of living in the present?
Yes, it did. That was the first thing they did when they came to power about the song. They commissioned new words to make it more in the present, because they thought, we are now in power, we are building socialism, so they changed the tense from the future more towards the present. Yeah, all the way through the history of this song, the words have changed over the years, and I think Tony Benn was a complete fool to say don't mess with the words, because if he'd known anything about the history of the song, he would have recognised that it has to be updated.
So I don't know this Tony Benn story. Was he critical of Billy Bragg's version?
Yeah, he was critical of anybody who mucked around with the words that he'd known when he first entered the Labour Party. He was a traditionalist, but he didn't understand that tradition involves development and evolution.
Can we just come back to that point you were just making about Stalin and 1944? It seems to me, because having spent 5 years at Dash thinking about what it means to be live in the Soviet Union and to live in its shadows, to make that act towards the end of World War II, while the Soviet Union have sided with the Allies and they're fighting the Nazis together, it seems like a very weird time for Stalin to disrupt that alliance through changing the anthem. Do you know anything about why it was that point? I mean, I can understand post-war, but or even pre-war, before they entered it, but just then it's really fascinating.
Well, during the war, the Stalin administration recognised that it had to turn more to patriotic appeals to the population in order to stir up the enthusiasm for fighting the Nazis. And as Hitler started to be defeated, also Stalin wanted to assure the Western Allies, the USA and the UK, that he ruled a state that was a normal state that didn't have pretensions to taking over the whole of the world. So for those two reasons, he didn't feel it was appropriate to have a national anthem that was all about the workers of the world throwing out the governments of the world. So he was a devious and calculating and very, very intelligent dictator. And so he ran a competition. I mean, he didn't muck around with this. People had to send in their tunes, and then he himself edited the words of the new state hymn. And it was only got rid of in the 1990s, that new state hymn, was after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Fascinating insight, Robert. I'm really pleased I asked you that question. I mean, I was just looking back at the lyrics, that line that I quoted earlier about Caesar, and there is that line, no one will give us deliverance, not a god, not a czar, and not a hero. We'll achieve liberation with our own hand. And maybe there's something about Stalin as the great leader of that time also, that maybe he didn't, maybe it was slightly rubbing his own face in it by saying that they didn't need a leader.
Yeah, of course, the word Tsar didn't appear in the original French version. There's an example of how the text changes depending on who's singing it and in what country they are. It came into it with the Russian version. And then it went out with the word Tsar in it to some of the other countries as well, and some of the other languages.
So the song lived on in the kind of in communist communities and socialist communities post-war. It had an ongoing relevance.
Yeah, and I think I went to a funeral about 10 years ago of a man who had left the Communist Party, and they played the Internationale at his funeral, and you could look around the mourners, and you could see how much it meant to them. He was a very, very old man when he died. How much their youth had been spent singing this song. So even though the song was ditched by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, it lived on in the minds of people who had been communists before the war. And of course, the Internationale still was sung by socialist parties and Labour parties around the world anyway. So it always had been. It always had been.
Are there particular verses or lines that you love?
Well, I think I just like the opening. Arise, ye downtrodden, ye exploited. It's very moving. It's a song that speaks about the people who are downtrodden, exploited, oppressed. In a way, it's not a classical protest song because it is so much a song of hope, isn't it? It's not just saying the world's rotten, the world's against us. It's saying we can do something about this world and we can change it. It's not the call of people who have given up hope. It's not the call of people who are asking to be pitied. It's a call to action by the poor, by the employees who are fed up with the way the legal system is against them, the fiscal system is against them, the wage system is against them. Yeah, I think it's a great song of hope.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no rights.
Let's go back to Billy Bragg and the origin story of his version of this great song of hope, which we began with at the Vancouver Folk Festival.
Subsequently, I mean, you've got to remember 1989, that was summer 1989. In the autumn of 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. And suddenly the Cold War was coming to an end. And in 1990, it seemed to me that in the urge to rid the world of Stalinism and totalitarianism, which had been a mark of Soviet communism, all of our political left-wing culture was going to go in the skip, everything, not just the really bad parts, not just the totalitarian aspects of it, but everything. And I thought that one of the ways to perhaps salvage some of that would be to update the lyrics of the Internationale, to actually write another 2 verses and record a new lyric for the 21st century. So I started, coming to writing stuff, and I thought I'm going to have to, have I really got the right to do this? It's a bit of a punk rock thing to do. This is an old tradition. So I started going to see people I respected to ask them, not for permission, but to just see if they thought it was a bad idea. And among the first people, obviously Pete thought it was a good idea. So I had Pete Seeger on side. But I went to see Ewan MacColl and Peggy Seeger. So I rang them up and went over there, and we sat down, and I sang the lyrics to them. And Ewan thought they were great, and Peggy had some suggestions, which is always handy. So I came away, having modified my lyrics a bit. And then I went to see Dick Gaughan. Probably the most, of all the communists I work with, he's the one who most understands what we do. He's a musician himself. So I trusted him implicitly. And he liked it as well. He thought it was a good idea. And then he sang on the album with me. I made an album with this song on it, the Internationale on it. And so in 1990, I put out an album of political songs called the Internationale, which, I got a choir and a brass band together, and we recorded it. And I'm pleased to say it struck a chord with people. And now most often if I'm out anywhere and there's someone singing the Internationale, they're often singing my lyrics, which is a great honour to me, a great privilege. And also, but they always say to me, we've changed them slightly. And I say, well, that's okay. That's how it works. That's the process. It's not written in stone. So I wouldn't have been able to change it. So whatever you feel fits where you are. That's the positive thing.
Yeah, I spoke to John Street, who's just done this amazing website of political songwriting, and he was really talking about that. Great love, really. That is the point of these songs, these protest songs, is they're ever changing and they're ever relevant. And it's lovely to feel that I can completely see how you have updated the lyrics. I'm just looking at them now. So there's a lot of new ideals and ideas that you've put into them.
I did try to retain some of the original English language lyric. There's a bit in the last verse, no saviour from on high delivers. And I tried to fit that in with the final line, although they offer us concessions, change will not come from above. Yeah. I tried to underscore each verse with a strong idea. The first verse ends, freedom is merely privilege extended unless enjoyed by one and all. The idea of equality, that obviously internationalism is a key aspect to that.
Well, on that lyric, actually, I was just thinking about that line actually when you were saying that it came out with the end of communism, because now that now makes a lot of sense to me that communism has failed in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc, but the ideals that it stood for need to continue. It
was complicated because in that year, 1990, I did some gigs in Czechoslovakia, and they were just coming out of the Cold War, just coming out of the Warsaw Pact. And I sang the Internationale and people booed.
Wow.
And I had to talk. Well, I kind of expected a little bit of that because it was synonymous to them with the Soviets. But the point I was trying to make was that we can't throw all this stuff away. We can't just suddenly say everything that happened that's in any way connected with this in the tradition has got to go. And fortunately, my Czechoslovakian translator was also a musician, and he was an old guy, older than me, and he really got it because we talked a lot about it beforehand. I said, look, I want to sing the Internationale. Do you think this is a good idea? He said, well, they'll probably boo you, but it's worth saying that we can't just throw everything. The point you're trying to make is a really valid point. I think it's worth it. So we did do that, and he and I made that case from the stage that some of these things were worth preserving and worth updating. And so that's how I came to write a second verse that's more about the environment, that's more about, the vanity of nations, that idea. I wanted to give it that a bit of a green angle as well, because I think that's obviously, broadly speaking, in the most broadest sense, I suppose, in the non-political sense. The Internationale is an evocation of the common good, a notion of the common good, which all progressive politics are based on. So I think the climate crisis is an absolute key situation that requires us to act in the common good and to understand that. So I wanted to put that in the song. So that was there in the tradition as well. And it wasn't all just about ideology, that it's about broader issues.
Yeah, I was definitely feeling that through the lyrics, that it's both political, and I love that you brought in the racist ignorance, because that wasn't, none of those ideals, let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. I really love those ideas because they weren't there in 1860. I mean, we know when we talked about racism.
I mean, that was one of the problems, that it was a kind of a one perspective song, the Internationale, in its original version. It didn't really have, to me, it didn't have that broader connection and recognition of imperialism, recognition of environmentalism. It had the struggle in there. The struggle was absolutely clear in there. There's war, there's chains, there's the whole, the striking while the iron is hot, which I tried to get a bit of that in my final verse. But I think it just needed to be a bit more humanist. I hope my communist friends aren't disappointed by that.
Yeah, I think it is humanist. But you've stuck with the comrades. The comrades are there. So comrades, come rally. There's nods to that world is not gone. I tell you, I really, there are two, I love so much about your lyrics, but there are two things that I find are really interesting. One is that the line, when you've changed the chorus, this is the final struggle, and you've changed that to, for the struggle carries on. And it's interesting for me, for having just heard you say that was a nod to, that was a reminder that we should stick by those ideals, or the communism has failed. To me, I'd read that as something else, which spoke to something that I had a conversation with John Street about, which was the point of protest music, right? I said to him at some point, I was like, do you think people really think they're going to make a change by going out on the streets? Is the point the journey? Is the point to have some kind of action that happens off the back of your protest? And we ended up coming to the conclusion together that it's about the journey. It's about getting on the streets and uniting your voices in song, and that's the point, really. It's reminding ourselves that we're human. And I love that you've got that in some way in your lyrics. It's just about continuing. It just carries on.
It does, because I feel very much it's a tradition. I feel that the Internationale is part of that tradition. Obviously, the John Street's project is manifest of the tradition. You can see it there. You can understand from that because it's focused specifically on England, that there's always been a tradition of dissent in this country, as strong as the imperial tradition, as strong as the establishment tradition. There's been a strong, that thread of dissent goes all the way back to Magna Carta. The attempt to hold the absolute power of the monarchy to account. And obviously it's there in the Civil War, it's there in the Reformation, the absolute power of the Pope. That dissenting tradition is absolutely key to our society, the society that we live in. And so when people do get out on the streets, for me, they're there. That's an expression of patriotism. They care so much about their society that they're willing to go out in the streets and stand together and express their solidarity around an issue. They're the things that I think are most empowering. And that's what music can do. It can help you to recharge your activism so that you go away and think, I'm not the only person who gives a shit about this stuff. We all need a bit of that. When I do a gig and I finish off by, I might finish with "There's Power in a Union," and everyone, puts their fists in the air and everything. I know what it does for me. It banishes my cynicism and fires up my activism. But what I'm trying to do is make the audience feel the same. I'm trying to make the audience take away some of that expression of solidarity home with them, because they might be living in a place where they feel isolated because of their politics. They might be living working in a place where there's kind of like, casual sexism and racism and homophobia. And they need to feel that there are people in their town who give a shit about this stuff. And from the gig, from that expression, because all those people are singing together, that, the solidarity of song gives them something to, the impetus that we all need to live up to the courage of our convictions.
And to me, it's not just about being personally empowered and uplifted and carry on that fight, but I think it's a reminder that we're part of a community. There is something about choral singing in unison, which is also so important. It's not just us alone on our journey.
That's very, very important. But I think the interesting thing is I think it happens on every level. You know, imagine you go to see Adele. Adele's your favourite singer. And, you know, a new album is about divorce, and you've been through something similar to what she's been through. And you've got a particular song that does that amazing thing that songs can do, which is it says something that you can't quite put into words. And you've got that song, and that when you hear that song, it makes you feel that you're not alone and you're fired up. You go and see her live, she's singing it. The person who opened the door to this feeling for you, you're singing it, and maybe 10,000 other people are singing it. And all of a sudden you feel that whatever emotions you've connected with this are totally justified, are totally accepted. And I think that works the same with political songs as well. When you go on a march, you realise that the anger that you have is not weird, it's not isolated. The manifestation is as much for the marchers as it is for the rest of society, to be able to all march together. And I've been on some incredibly powerful marches, the Iraq War marches, the Me Too marches. They're not just about we're protesting here. They're about we're being visible. We want you to see us. This is empowering what we're doing. And song plays an important role in that, because it can work in the context of a social evening out. You go out to a gig and that song suddenly fires you up, and you come outside and you think, oh, wow, yeah, I have a different perspective on things now. And it's hard, you know, it's not many places you feel that. You know, you can't get this online. I'll tell you that for nothing.
No, it's about being live in the room, in the moment, or on the streets with other people, totally hearing them. To that end, then, you wrote lyrics for the 21st century. Do you is it still in your repertoire today? Does it feel different? Are you still performing it?
I am still performing it, but it's one of those songs that it's all about the context. You can't just chuck it in every night. You know, it needs to. There's a moment when you step up, and the Internationale fits exactly what you're doing. Yeah, I mean, if we were on a political campaign and we were going around calling people together and, you know, needed something to sing at the end, yeah, that's exactly what you need. That's the song. Everyone stands up and sings the Internationale together, but not in a just an ordinary gig. It needs to be the right night. You know what I mean? Something needs to have happened that puts the Internationale into the context of that particular gig. It's more easy to play a song like There's Power in the Union because there's often something going on to do with industrial action when you're travelling around, so you can connect it to that. You know, without context, it just becomes a song. It needs the emotional feeling of something that's happening to give it that context. That's what's important about any song. Like No Pass Around, the same. You know, they need that emotional context that people get fired up about something that's happened.
So, do you remember the last time you sung it?
Ooh. Well, because it's been so long since I've done any gigs. It's kind of like it will probably be at Tolpuddle, I would imagine. You know, I played the Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival a few times, and there's often choirs there that sing it. You know, we march and sing together, and I kind of join in and try and watch that I don't trip up over the lyrics and get them wrong, because they've tweaked them a little bit. But that's cool. That's really cool. But it's always been like that. I mean, when we recorded it, I had a line in there Peggy had a problem with. I had a line in there based on an image from the Hungarian uprising of a guy standing in front of a Russian tank with his shirt open like that, saying, like, kill me, you know, I don't care, kill me. It's a very, very powerful image.
Yeah.
It was in the first verse. We bare our breasts before their armour. And Peggy said, that's two different meanings. And I was like, oh, yeah. I'm not so sure about that. And then when we came to record it, the women in the choir had a word with me about it. And I was like, yeah, okay, I've got to change this. So that's how it became We Stand Unbowed before their arm. But you have to be open to that. You have to be open to those kind of things, you know. I'm quite, you know, when those people say they prefer the original, I'm like, fine. You know, I have no problem with that at all. I'd feel the same if someone tried to update the lyrics of Jerusalem. I'd still love the original more than anything anyone could write, better than Blake. So I'm just trying to make it accessible to more people. The more people feel they can connect with it. And I think the archaic nature of the original English language lyric, which is it's a bit hard to sing. Whoever wrote it was thinking more about ideas than they were thinking about cadence. When I was writing mine, I was trying to put cadence first and then bring ideas in that fit that cadence, that had power, you know. Freedom is merely privilege extended. Bomb, 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 bomb. It's right on the nose, you know. Change will not come from above. You see how it just fits. You know, whereas each those at the forge must do their duty. It's kind of got a 1-2 word in at the same place, one word too many in there.
I'm just thinking kind of lyrically, it's all the long notes as you're hitting those. Are you thinking about the collective singing experience, right?
Yep.
To make people, you know, there's something about the pacing, and there's something almost about the marching of that as a rhythm that you're thinking about.
A few years ago, I was commissioned to write an English language translation of the Ode to Joy from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for some children to sing at the reopening of the Royal Festival Hall, because they were having trouble with the English language translation of the song, because it's about the daughters of Elysium and it wasn't really connecting with them. So I said, I'm happy to have a go at it. And the music teacher, as the meeting broke up where we were discussing it, the music teacher said, look, if you are going to write it, make sure it's all the words are on the notes, you know. Da 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 da. Don't, you know, fancy it up. So I just went away and wrote, you know, see now like a phoenix rising from the rubble of the war. You know, it's really straightforward, so it can be easily sung. And it's basically the Internationale to a different tune. But then I'm Billy Bragg, so what do you expect? What do you expect to get from me? You're not going to get a jolly, you know, something jolly. So yeah, the thing about when you're working with a song that is so well known, if you can fit the scansion of it, it's like a scaffolding. Everyone's aware of scaffolding. You know, the greatest writer of political songs, Joe Hill, used to write his lyrics to hymns, because everybody knew the tune of the hymn. So when you got the lyric, you didn't need to get the music as well. You didn't need to read the music. You just need to say it at the top, the name of the hymn that you sang the tune to, and you could immediately sing it. You know, if it said, you know, Onward Christian Soldiers, and there's a new lyric to it, you can, and providing the lyric is right on the scansion, pop, 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 you know, that's a great way to spread ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, work with something somewhat familiar to people already, so they feel a bit safe, and then hit them with the ideas.
Rather than here's a completely new song that you're going to have to familiarise yourself with that no one's really sure of. Here's a lyric that we can all sing now that I've written to this tune that we're all familiar with.
How much do you encourage that collective singing at your gigs? I mean, how important is it to your performance?
It's very important to my performance. Sometimes when I'm singing Between the Wars, I get the audience kind of treat it a bit like a hymn, and they all sing along, but not very loud. They kind of, it's like they're in church. And if I can hear that they're singing it, on the very last verse, I will lean right off the mic so that my voice is almost at the same level as theirs, and they become aware that everybody's singing it. And then they kind of pick it up and they kind of go with it, and I leave them to sing it and have a moment where they themselves are all connected with one another. It's not they're connected through me anymore. They're actually connected to one another. And that moment in that particular song has a lot more of an emotional weight to them all singing the choruses of New England at the end, because I let them sing the choruses of New England, but by the end of the show, they're all just singing at the top of their voices, mad. But that kind of hymnal moment where they're singing Between the Wars, the last verse, you know, call up the craftsman, bring me the draftsman, build me a path from cradle to grave. I'll give my consent to any government that does not deny a man a living wage. They sing that together. It kind of gives them possession of the song for a while, and I kind of like that. So I'm very much attuned to that. If that's happening, I you know, it gives me shivers, and I'm hoping it does the same to them as well.
Yeah, and they get the ownership over it,
which they should have. You know, which they should have. It shouldn't just belong to. It should be a communal thing.
Billy, I've got a couple more questions about Internationale. Do you think it changed you, that writing and that experience? I mean, like you dedicated a whole album to that song. Yeah,
I had to run that particular flag up the flagpole so people knew that although the Cold War had ended, I hadn't thought, okay, that's it, it's all good now, forget it, let's go and reload it. Because that's kind of what happened. You know, all those other people that I'd been working through with the miners' strike, who I thought were on side with me, all of a sudden were like, oh, right, sorted, all done, we've fixed this. Now we don't have to worry about this shit anymore. And I was like, not really. So the Internationale was quite an important record in that sense for me, because at the time, everything was going back towards pop music out of that period in the 1980s when there'd been quite political music. It was all going back towards pop. So that was my way of putting the marker down and taking something like the Internationale that was so central to what had gone on before, so central to the idea of the, Communist Internationale. I couldn't have chosen a more, it's like choosing the Empire State Building or, St. Paul's Cathedral. You couldn't think of a more obvious example to riff off. So that's why it had to be the Internationale for me. It wouldn't have worked with the Red Flag. It wouldn't have worked with No Passaran or other songs like that. The Internationale was the kind of edifice that it seemed to me was crumbling or that was under attack. So it was my way of saying, look, I'm carrying on. I can see the struggle carries on. I can see this isn't sorted. That, capitalism might think it's won, but that doesn't mean this is the end of these problems. One of the interesting things is, and I think that this happens to be a positive thing, is the language that we were using in the 1980s, the language of Marxism, doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore. I don't use that language anymore. I talk about, empathy and fighting against cynicism and things like that. The problem is that the things that Marxism was trying to address have not been resolved. So we have to find a new way to talk about those things, a new language, if you like, and the Internationale, the whole album was my first stab at trying that new album, but the next album, William Bloke, I was talking about socialism of the heart. I was talking about politics that comes not from their head. It's not, all about ideology, but that comes from the heart. It's all about empathy. I was trying to find a new language to articulate those ideas, a language that didn't have the baggage of totalitarianism with it. If you told someone that you wanted to live in a socialist society, you had to explain to them why that wasn't going to be like the Soviet Union. But if you told someone that you want to live in a compassionate society, everybody can understand that, And we need the tradition as well to fall back on. So how do you move it forward from somewhere like that? And I think by trying to reboot the Internationale was my aim, not to push away what had happened in the past and clean it up or tidy it for history, but to, regenerate it like Doctor Who for the new challenges ahead.
I'm really interested in whether you've come across other people who've rewritten the lyrics to the Internationale in other languages.
Well, there's a really good Japanese version by a group called Monokone Soul Flower, which is really, it's kind of like a Tom Waitsy version of it that I like. I have no idea what lyrics they're singing because obviously they're singing in Japanese. It doesn't sound like anything from the tradition, which is good. It's the version I most hear in my head when I think of the Internationale, their version. It's kind of like quite kind of chaotic, but it has the power still with it. You can still tell that they really feel what they're singing about.
But you've not come across any, any attempts to go back to the French?
No, I've not actually. I've not come along other rewrites. Every now and then I come across somewhere where they're talking about the Internationale, and they very often cite my lyrics or print my lyrics, but the other lyrics that they're talking about are often the traditional lyrics. The original lyrics, the French lyrics, literal translations of the French lyrics, Russian lyrics, English lyrics. One of the nice things is that in the IWW songbook, Little Red Songbook, my version is in there next to the original version, which, for me that's like a kind of a knighthood, isn't it? In on the left.
Yeah.
It's kind of really makes me feel that, it's not there to replace it. It's there to augment it. It's there to, lift it up again, and you pay your money, you take your choice. Sing it that way one week and my way the next week. It's not, and people often title it Billy Bragg's International. It's not Billy Bragg's bloody International. It's the bloody International, all right? It doesn't belong to anybody.
thanks to Billy, John and Robert for helping us to go deep into the world of the Internationale. I totally love that in the true spirit of its name, it has united the world in song. It's particularly meaningful for me at Dash, where everything we do explores connections across borders, that this great song of hope and call to action, to quote Robert, has evolved and adapted across time and countries to maintain its relevance. We'll be back with more podcasts in the series on Bella Ciao and No Pasaran. In the meantime, do explore our other European music-focused podcasts on Django Reinhardt and the songs of migrant workers. In fact, all of the Dash Arts podcasts are great, but then I'm quite biased. You can subscribe to our podcast via our website or wherever you get your podcasts to ensure you don't miss them. Do follow the show and share, and please leave us a review. It helps us stay visible and would mean the world to us. The Dash Arts podcast was produced by Rachel Head. I'm Josephine Burton, and thank you for listening.
For the struggle.